agree with you 100% about that. So my argument is that this particular new ideology, which is really interesting and insightful in some ways, but ultimately I think wrong-headed, is a political trap. It's actually going to make it easier for people like Trump to be re-elected. It has all kinds of negative political consequences, but it's also a personal trap. Because a lot of schools close to where we are sitting in New York right now, they say, you know, the main goal of a progressive education should now be to teach students to think of themselves primarily as racial beings, that to truly get the sense of belonging in society, they need to primarily think of themselves in terms of a particular intersection of identities into which they're born. Now, obviously, to belong in society, you can't have racism, you can't have discrimination, you can't say you're less than because of the group you're born in. But I think that falls in exactly the trap you're talking about, because to feel seen in society, I need to be recognized for my own preferences and ideas and character. My brother might have many similar identities to me, but I'm not my brother. I'm not going to be seen in the world if everybody perceives me as exactly the same as my brother, right? And so I think precisely we need respect for different groups. It's wonderful that in America we celebrate people's different cultural origins. Solidarity between people who've historically been oppressed is wonderful. But if you have an education that says you should see yourself as a racial being, the most important thing about you is the particular group into which you're born, that's how you define yourself, then we fall exactly into that trap. As you know, a lot of my work has been about that, right? This is my 5th book. The last 2 books have been about the threat of right-wing populism. I like to say I'm a democracy crisis hipster. I worried about the crisis of democracy before it was cool. I was warning about right-wing populists like Donald Trump, but also like people like Marine Le Pen in France and people like Narendra Modi in India before 2016. So I agree with you that that is urgent and we have to fight against it. Now, purely politically, I actually think that one of the reasons why these ideas have become so prevalent in progressive spaces is that Donald Trump won in 2016 and it became impossible to criticize some bad ideas on our own side as a result. But one of the reasons why Trump is now doing very well in the polls is that people mistrust these institutions because of the prevalence of some of these ideas. So we saw in a recent New York Times analysis that one key new voting bloc in the Republican Party is voters who are predominantly non-white, who are actually progressive on many issues, including acceptance of trans people and other kinds of things, but who are being pushed away from the Democratic Party by some of these ideas. Now, to the broader question about identity politics, yes, I don't like the term identity politics. I avoid it because it's too many things at the same time. Certain forms of identity politics are perfectly legitimate if you're fighting against injustices that apply to you because of a group of which you're a part. That is a normal part of politics and a laudable part of politics. But when you see, for example, aid for small businesses during the pandemic, going not to those businesses that have lost the most revenue, but rather to businesses depending on the skin color of the people who own those businesses. I think that that is failing the economic purpose of those policies, which is to help businesses survive during the pandemic that have most been affected by them. And I think it's setting up that kind of zero-sum politics where we're turning American politics into just an outright fight between groups. And there's no reason to think that in a systematic way, those groups that have been historically most marginalized are going to be ones who win that fight. I think it's setting us up for failure in terms of actually helping those groups, and it is helping drive people to those dangerous white supremacists and far-right populists that, like you, I'm reading. I think that's right, and there is such a tradition in American politics. In my mind, it goes from people like Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln to Martin Luther King Jr. to Barack Obama. And I think the thing to understand about these terms of woke or critical race theory that have been debated so much is that they've been much misunderstood by everybody in the debate. So on the right, people say, you know, you want to teach kids about the history of slavery in school, or you want them to have sex ed. That's woke, or that's critical race theory, and that's obviously absurd. But a lot of people, my friends and colleagues, will then think, well, all that woke is just being nice to people, is recognizing the real injustices of American history, or being afraid of somebody like Donald Trump coming back into the White House in 2024. When you actually look at some of the origin of these ideas and the way that they're being applied in all kinds of settings today, from nonprofits to corporations to schools, as I do in my new book, The Identity Trap, I think you find that these ideas go well beyond that they're actually based on an explicit rejection of that political tradition that I most prize in American politics, that the key theorists of critical race theory, for example, have argued that we should reject the defunct racial equality ideology of the civil rights movement, as Derek Bell once put it, or that the philosophy of Barack Obama is fundamentally at odds with a key part of it, and one of my huge worries, right? So you go back to that example in schools, right? There's now many schools in which teachers come into third grade, second grade, first grade classrooms, right? And they split those kids up and say, if you're black, you go over there. If you're Latino, you go over there. If you're Asian American, you go over there. If you're white, you go in that corner. Now, one of my concerns about this is precisely what happens to those white kids. And it's not that we might be uncomfortable. It's fine to be uncomfortable sometimes in your education and to be lectured about something that you might find not very nice. That's fine. I don't worry about that. I think that's a good part of an education. What I'm worried about is what's going to happen to those kids. The hope of these educators is that once you encourage them, as Bank Street School in New York says, to own their European heritage, to define themselves as strongly as possible as white, they think they're going to disclaim white privilege and become anti-racist. I worry, based on all my readings in social psychology and all my understanding in history, that if you tell somebody the most important thing about you is that you're white, that's how you should self-identify, you should lean into that identity, you're not going to become an anti-racist, you're going to become a racist. You're going to fight for the interests of your group over that of others. So I don't think these pedagogical practices are in fact helping us deal with problems like white supremacy.
Is there evidence that that's the case?
We haven't studied exactly what the effect of those kind of lectures is. There hasn't been work one way or the other on that. But I do think that there's very strong evidence in social psychology that that's how it works. That how you define groups, right, or how you think of yourself depends very strongly on social context. So you can think of yourself as an American who shares things with other people. You can think of yourself as, a member of your sports team, right, as a member of your school community. Or you can think of yourself predominantly as white. And if you lean more into that identity, then it has always been the case in history that you're going to prioritize the interests of your in-group over that